I can still see the fire, the black column of smoke against the impossibly blue Mediterranean sky, rising where just moments before the proudest warship in our entire fleet had been. It wasn't a glorious battle, a clash of titans in the night. It was a cold, brutal execution, a betrayal delivered from the clouds by our former allies. The Roma, our new flagship, the most beautiful, most powerful piece of Italian naval engineering, less than 2 years old, was not sunk by the British or the Americans, the enemies we had trained to fight. She was annihilated, vaporized by a weapon we hadn't even known existed, dropped by the Germans, the men we had fought alongside for years. I was a young signalman then, standing on the deck of the cruiser Eugenio di Savoia, watching the entire world of Italian naval power turn to ash and smoke right in front of me, in the Strait of Bonifacio. Tell me, was this the price of peace? Was this what we deserved for trying to survive? The sheer incomprehensible horror of that day, September 9th, 1943, haunts my sleep even now, all these decades later. My story, the story of the Roma, is really the story of an entire nation's collapse, a desperate scramble for survival and the cruel, impersonal dawn of a new kind of warfare. To understand the tragedy, you have to go back to the beginning, to the year 1938, when the keel of the Roma was laid in the Cantieri Riuniti dell'Adriatico in Trieste. I was just a boy, but I remember the national pride. She was one of the 4 mighty Littorio-class battleships, a magnificent beast of over 40,000 tons, sleek, fast, with 9 enormous 300mm guns in 3 triple turrets. We didn't build clumsy, blocky ships like the British or the Americans. Our ships, like the Roma, were masterpieces of naval art, a testament to the Italian genius for design. I joined the Navy in '41, just as the war was turning sour for us in North Africa, but I didn't get to see my ship, my true ship, until 1942. When I first stepped onto her deck in June of that year, I felt a kind of reverence. Her hull was a maze of compartmentation, designed with the Pugliese system to shrug off torpedo hits, a fortress of steel. She was supposed to be invulnerable, a true expression of the name she carried. Rome, eternal, unyielding. But the sad, bitter irony is that she was commissioned and almost immediately shelved. Italy was running out of fuel, the lifeblood of a modern battleship, and so the Roma spent her life mostly at anchor in Taranto, then later in La Spezia, never firing her main guns in anger at a hostile fleet. I remember long, monotonous watches, polishing brass, training, endless drills. But the battle we longed for, the glorious Trafalgar-style engagement that the fleet was built for, never came. Instead, the enemy came from above. The first hint that our great steel fortress was just a huge, tempting target came in 1943. By then, I was serving in the communications section, running messages and tapping out Morse code in the radio room, close to the heart of the ship's command structure. We had moved to La Spezia, and the Allied bombers were a constant, terrifying presence. On June 5th, the American B-17s hit us hard. I was below deck when the first bomb slammed down. It wasn't the sound that got me, but the sheer, monstrous jolt that ran through the entire ship's structure like a giant being struck by a hammer. 2 heavy armor-piercing bombs found the Roma, one near miss that still tore open the hull, and another that punched through several decks before passing out the bottom and exploding in the water. Thousands of tons of water rushed in. The unyielding fortress was bleeding. We survived, of course, thanks to the sheer thickness of her armor and the courage of the damage control parties. But the repairs were extensive, and the feeling of invulnerability was gone. The damage was repaired, but the morale, I swear, never fully recovered. We were no longer fighting a war of glorious sea battles. We were simply trying to survive the next air raid. A second raid just a few weeks later damaged us again. The great Roma, the pride of Italy, was stuck in port, limping, wounded, and utterly humiliated. This was the dark, suffocating summer of 1943. The true moment of decision, the point of no return for all of us, came in early September. The political situation on land was a complete mess. Mussolini had been deposed, arrested, and the new government under Marshal Badoglio was secretly negotiating an armistice with the Allies. We, the men on the ships, felt it in the air. The constant secrecy, the hushed conversations among the senior officers, the sudden, unexplained changes in routine. On September 8th, the news finally broke. Italy had surrendered to the Allies. The announcement was a shockwave. I remember the confusion, the mix of relief that the war might be over and the profound immediate anxiety about what this meant for us, the fleet, and our former German allies. I saw the faces of the officers, pale and drawn, clustered around the radio. Our new orders were to sail from La Spezia and surrender the fleet to the Allies at Malta. It was a humiliating, bitter pill to swallow, but it was an order, and the alternative was being seized by the Germans, who were already occupying Italian ports. Our commander, Admiral Carlo Bergamini, was on board the Roma, and he was a man of immense personal dignity and a deep, traditional sense of naval honor. To surrender the fleet without firing a shot must have been an absolute torment for him. The night of the 9th, we slipped out of La Spezia, 3 battleships including the Italia and the Vittorio Veneto, and a host of cruisers and destroyers, a magnificent yet utterly tragic armada. We were a ghost fleet sailing toward an uncertain future. Our immediate destination, however, was not Malta, but La Maddalena in Sardinia. King Victor Emmanuel III and the new government were seeking refuge there. Bergamini had hoped to stop, refuel, and wait for the situation to clarify before the final soul-crushing voyage to Malta. But when we were nearing the Strait of Bonifacio, the word came La Maddalena had been occupied by the Germans. Our one hope of respite was gone. There was no going back. The Germans were already closing in on La Spezia. The choice was simple and terrible. Proceed to Malta or fight the Germans, our former comrades. Bergamini, seeing no other path that would save the fleet from being scuttled or captured, ordered a change of course directly for Malta. It felt like walking into a cage, but it was the only way to honor the terms of the armistice and keep our ships from German hands. As we entered the Strait of Bonifacio, the atmosphere was one of silent dread, a kind of collective holding of breath. We knew the Germans wouldn't let their most powerful allies' fleet just sail away. It was in this moment, mid-story as we sailed into the throat of the strait, that the most profound decision of my life, the life of my ship, and the life of my country was being made. We were caught between a humiliating surrender to our long-term enemies and a fatal confrontation with our recent allies, all for the slim hope of an end to the bloodshed. So that's the situation I was in, sailing on the ship that was Italy's last hope, and we had to make a choice between honor, surrender, and survival. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have turned back to fight the Germans or held course toward the Allies, accepting the shame for the sake of survival? The sky was clear, the sea calm, almost beautiful. A cruel joke of nature on such a day. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, the call came down from the bridge, sharp and urgent. Aircraft approaching bearing 270. Everyone scanned the sky, expecting the familiar silhouette of British or American bombers. But the planes that appeared were German, Dornier 217s, a squadron of them, high above us. This was a warning, a threat from our so-called friends. They circled, and I remember thinking, they'll turn back. They're just making a show. But then the first plane began its dive. We opened fire with our anti-aircraft guns, a frantic, desperate defense. I could hear the sharp cracks of the 90mm guns and the chattering of the smaller machine guns, throwing up a curtain of flak. Then I saw it, a black shape detached from the Dornier, a bomb. But it didn't fall like a normal bomb. It glided. It had wings. It was as if it was being steered. It was the first time I or anyone on the Roma had seen a guided bomb, the German Fritz X. This wasn't a random drop. This was a precision-guided execution tool. The first Fritz X narrowly missed the Italia, her sister ship, but the near-miss explosion jarred her badly, jamming her rudder and sending her limping out of the formation. The second aircraft made its attack run, and this time the bomb came straight for us. I was still near the radio room when it hit, and the sound was not the clean metallic gong of an ordinary shell. It was a crunch, a deep, sickening impact that was instantly followed by a profound, earth-shaking blast deep inside the ship. The first Fritz X, the guided missile of the future, had struck the Roma on the starboard side aft of the main mast. It tore through the decks and, I believe, exited the hull before detonating underwater beneath the keel. The damage was catastrophic. Boiler rooms and the aft engine room were instantly flooded, killing power to 2 of our propellers, dropping our speed to a crawl and sparking innumerable fires. The invulnerable fortress was already on its knees. We were dead in the water, listing, on fire, and completely alone. But the Germans were not done. They saw the wounded flagship, and they pressed the attack with cold, merciless efficiency. Just 6 minutes later, the second bomb arrived. I saw the plane high up and then the dark shape falling, guiding itself with terrifying intelligence. This one hit us forward on the starboard side and detonated inside the ship. The main magazines of the forward number 2 turret were breached and ignited. What followed was not an explosion but a deflagration, a giant, fiery exhalation of burning propellant that blew the entire 500-ton main turret clean off the deck, launching it into the sea, destroying the entire forward superstructure, including the main command bridge. It was a column of fire that shot hundreds of feet into the air, a final screaming protest from the ship. I was thrown violently against the bulkhead, the heat washing over me like a physical wave, blinding and suffocating. Admiral Bergamini, Captain Del Cima, and nearly everyone on the bridge were killed instantly. I lay there, stunned, my uniform smoking, the air filled with the coppery smell of blood and the acrid stench of cordite. The end was swift and brutal. With her bow completely compromised and the forward magazines gone, the Roma began to sink quickly. She took on a heavy list to starboard, the sea rushing in to claim the gaping wound where the turret had been. The list grew steeper, the deck sliding toward the water. Someone, a junior officer named Agostino Incisa della Rocchetta, the highest-ranking officer left alive, gave the order to abandon ship. It was a final, desperate act of leadership. I scrambled onto the sloping deck, the chaos a deafening mix of steam, fire, and the screams of the wounded. I saw men jumping, trying to get away from the massive ship that was now a roaring funeral pyre. She went down bow first, then, unable to bear the weight, she capsized completely, turning over to expose her great wounded belly. I remember hearing a grinding, tearing shriek of metal as the immense structure finally gave way, breaking in two, and then she was gone. It happened in barely 20 minutes from the first hit to the final, churning vortex of water where the largest ship in our Navy had been. I found myself in the water, coughing up oil and brine, clinging to a piece of floating debris, watching the spot where my ship had been. The horror of that loss was not just the steel but the men. Out of the nearly 1,900 souls on board, over 1,300 were lost, swallowed by the sea. They were my shipmates, my friends, my admiral. The survivors, barely 600 of us, were eventually picked up by the accompanying destroyers. The betrayal was complete. The great battleship, built to fight the fleets of Britain and America, was destroyed by a single terrifyingly precise weapon wielded by our so-called allies, a testament to the fact that the age of the slow, heavily armored battleship was over, replaced by the guided missile. The Roma was not just a ship that sank. She was a symbol of the end of an era. The remaining ships of our fleet continued on, a shaken, wounded column, and eventually made it to Allied ports, completing the bitter act of surrender. But for me, the war ended in that moment, watching the black smoke dissipate over the waves, carrying the souls of my friends. The aftermath was a grim silence. We were interned, our ships disarmed, the great Italian fleet reduced to a hostage. We had done our duty. We had obeyed the orders of our king and government, but the consequence was betrayal and massive loss of life. I carried the guilt for years. Why did I survive when so many better men did not? The story of the Roma became a dark, uncomfortable footnote in history, a story of an obsolete weapon of war meeting a terrifying weapon of the future. The moral of this story is not about naval strategy. It's about the brutal personal cost of political collapse. When a nation falls apart, the people, the soldiers, the sailors are the ones caught in the crossfire, victims of friends and foes alike. We sailed toward peace and found betrayal and death. If you felt the horror and the personal tragedy of that day, like this video. Subscribe to my channel for more untold stories from the forgotten corners of history. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I want to know. Should Admiral Bergamini have fought the Germans even if it meant certain destruction? I'll see you all in the next story.